the uplifted view of man and of the human potential. The sum of it is Aristotelian, specifically Aristotelian, as against the mysticism of the Platonic tradition, or I might add the self-proclaimed bankruptcy of the skeptics. Here you see on a full-fledged historical cultural scale a system of philosophic principles shaping the soul of an entire era. What did this philosophy and soul lead to existentially? I mean here politically. The first and only country in history to be formed deliberately in accordance with a philosophy, an explicit, rational philosophy, the nation of the Enlightenment, the United States. The fundamentals that Aristotle laid down enabled men such as Locke to formulate a politics which reflected an Aristotelian base, and they then bequeathed this politics to the founding fathers.
Hey, Joe from Mindshare here. 3 points that I want to make. Number 1, objectivism gives a lot of support for establishing a society based on reason. Number 2, reason leads to happiness. A society based explicitly on reason and philosophy makes it easy to achieve happiness. Number 3, removal of brakes. We should be unapologetic about wanting happiness in this world. Number 1, if you do like I do, look for support in the objectivist materials for society based on reason. You find it everywhere. The audio cut from Peikoff you just listened to is just a small sample. This is one reason I think that Mindshare has a positive chance of success. Number 2, a society based explicitly on reason and philosophy will make it easy to achieve happiness. Most of you have probably tried succeeding quite a bit. You know that when you use your mind, you have an easy time achieving what you want. You identify the essence of objects around you, and it becomes easy for you to predict how things are going to go in the future. Because of this, you see that it's easy to navigate the present in order to get what you want in the future. If a whole society is doing this, that society will necessarily be very pro-life and happiness. When a lot of people are succeeding all the time, people remain happy. If it's easy to make money, easy to have good relationships, easy to raise children, easy to fill your life with values, then happiness becomes the normal. 3. Removal of brakes. Many things in life I have tried with resistance. I do things, but not wholeheartedly. I am not committed. For long, it was like this with objectivism to me. I thought Ayn Rand had some good points and definitely a very good view of life, but I was not into this whole philosophy thing. But at some point I realized that these ideas were so beneficial to my life that I decided to just go with it and see where it takes me. I think a society of reason should be just like that. We remove the brakes. We should travel at full throttle, full speed, be fully principled, and just see how far these ideas can take us. What does this mean in practical action? If productivity is a virtue, the people involved in Mindshare should work harder than most. If honesty is a virtue, people should be rewarded for being honest in an organization. If justice is a virtue, good people should be praised for their hard work. We should be blatant about it. We want happiness in this world. We want money, friends, romantic relationships, happy kids, nice houses, good food, fast travel. We want it all, and without apologies. So summing up, number 1, as far as I can see, objectivism very strongly supports the idea of establishing a society based on reason. Number 2, a society based explicitly on reason and philosophy will make it easy to achieve happiness. Number 3, we should remove the brakes and just go full steam ahead. We want happiness and lots of it. We want a society of reason. Thank you for your time.
The nation of the Enlightenment, the United States. The fundamentals that Aristotle laid down enabled men such as Locke to formulate a politics which reflected an Aristotelian base, And they then bequeathed this politics to the Founding Fathers. Metaphysically, these enlightened men held, since reality is this world of concretes, the individual is fully real and autonomous. He is not a Platonic shadow of God or a fragment of the collective. Epistemologically and ethically, since reason is an attribute of the individual, the power and value of man, the rational being, means the power and value of the individual who exercises his reason. And thus the Enlightenment's individualism, grounded, you see, in its fundamental philosophy. And thus the Founding Fathers' affirmation of rights, natural, inalienable, individual rights, the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These rights were called natural to indicate that their base is the facts or laws of nature, not any arbitrary human decision. And they were called inalienable to indicate that they are absolutes, not subject to infringement by any person or group. And I quote, "To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed," unquote. And government, therefore, is forbidden to infringe man's rights because, as Samuel Adams put it at the time, quote, "The grand end of civil government, from the very nature of its institution, is for the support, protection, and defense of those very rights," unquote. The Founding Fathers' acceptance of the principle of rights and their ability to devise the brilliant system of checks and balances to enable their politics to become an implemented, functioning reality, this was a magnificent and unprecedented human achievement. It represents the full flower, in political terms, for the first time in history, of the principles of an Aristotelian approach to philosophy. The existential results of the Enlightenment's ideas continued on through the 19th century. And these results include the Industrial Revolution, the constantly rising standard of living, the spread of freedom, and the Romanticist movement in art. Intellectually, however, in terms of the ideas of the West's leading thinkers, the end of the 18th century marks the end of the Aristotelian period. For centuries, the Platonist axis had been laying the base of a counter-revolution, as you could call it. The line from Hobbes and Descartes through Berkeley and Hume was preparing all the doctrines that would explode at the end of the 18th century in Kant. Kant proceeded to reintroduce the Platonic principles in a new, much more virulent form, to sweep the intellectual philosophical world before him, and thereby to wreck and bring to an end the Enlightenment. Thereafter, the philosophers of the 19th century gradually and almost systematically became more and more irrational. The breach between the existential, political, aesthetic achievements of the century and the philosophy of its leading thinkers finally became impossible. And the existential achievements, devoid of philosophic base, began in the last decades of the century to peter out or collapse in every field and to be replaced by their opposites. This is the context in which our century, the 20th, arrived, with all the appropriate existential insignia crammed into the opening decades, from the development of modern art and of the welfare state and of modern totalitarianism on through World War and the Great Depression. And things went on down from there to the point where we are today. Which brings me to the third and last example I want to discuss of the role of philosophy in history: today, today's culture. Now, when I say culture here, I don't mean only or even primarily politics and economics, although that's included. But the role of philosophy in these areas today, I think, is obvious to this audience. I mean culture here in a somewhat more specific sense. Culture as the sum of men's intellectual, artistic pursuits, as embracing the humanities, art, science, religion, education, the trends at the universities. Modern 20th century culture is an unprecedented phenomenon. If you grasp its actual nature, that alone will give you an invaluable key to understanding human history and the role of philosophy therein. First, what is modern culture? What is its essence, which unites its various manifestations in the various areas? Let me here indicate briefly, in no special order, the kinds of trends we are offered, and specifically what I take as new or different in this century. I'll look at some of the major realms which constitute a culture. In literature, the distinctively 20th century trend is not so much naturalism, which after all began in the 19th century and has pretty much faded now in terms of intellectual prestige, but rather the literary cult of depravity, psychosis, and/or horror. You can take as a clear example Franz Kafka, who specializes in nightmare projections of agonized, nameless ciphers throbbing with terror, paralyzed by an apocalyptic, unknowable reality.